I'm Elena, 28 years old, and I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. My grandmother, Margaret, was the anchor of my life after my mother passed away when I was just 6. My father, David, always seemed more interested in grandmother's wealth than in being a father to me. At the reading of her will when he inherited $42 million, he looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You're nothing but a burden now." What he didn't know about the will's conditions would turn his world upside down in just 48 hours. If you're watching this, please let me know in the comments where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how my grandmother's brilliant plan exposed my father's true nature from beyond the grave. My earliest memory of my mother is her singing lullabies in our small apartment above the bakery. Isabella was her name, and she had the most gentle voice that could calm any storm. I was 6 when leukemia stole her from us. The hospital visits became routine. Her beautiful dark hair fell out from chemotherapy. And then one morning, my father, David, sat me down and told me matter-of-factly that Mommy had lost her battle. No emotion, no comfort, just clinical facts delivered like a weather report. That same day, my grandmother Margaret arrived like a guardian angel. While my father immediately returned to his sales job, acting as if nothing had changed, Grandma Margaret scooped me up and brought me to her Victorian home on Maple Street. "Your mama loved playing in this garden when she was your size," she told me as we walked through her rose garden, her weathered hands pointing to the swing set she had kept all these years. Margaret Williams was a remarkable woman who had built Williams Food Corporation, a specialty food manufacturing company, from a single catering business her parents had owned. She started by selling her famous homemade preserves to local stores, and over 40 years built an empire worth tens of millions. Yet she still wore the same pearl earrings every day and insisted on cooking Sunday dinners herself. "Success means nothing if you forget where you came from," she would tell me while teaching me to make her famous apple pie in her kitchen. My father, David, was Margaret's only child, but he had never shown interest in the family business. He preferred his comfortable sales position at a pharmaceutical company, always talking about making it big with various get-rich-quick schemes. The employees at Williams Food Corporation respected my grandmother but barely tolerated David during his rare visits to the office. I often heard Margaret on the phone saying, "David has ambition but no dedication. He wants the reward without the work." This created a tension I could feel even as a child. David would visit us monthly, usually when he needed money for his latest investment opportunity. During these visits, he would study grandmother's antiques and artwork with calculating eyes, often making comments about their value. He rarely asked about my school or interests, instead focusing on when grandmother might retire and what her succession plans were. Throughout my childhood, I desperately tried to connect with my father. I would save my best artwork from school to show him, practice piano pieces for weeks before his visits, and memorize jokes I thought might make him laugh. His responses were always polite, but distant. "That's nice, Elena," became his standard reply to everything I shared. Meanwhile, my grandmother attended every school play, helped with homework, and celebrated every small achievement as if it were a major victory. When it came time for college, I chose business management, hoping it might finally give me something to discuss with my father. I was accepted to Northwestern University and called him excitedly to share the news. "Business is practical," he said after a long pause. "At least you won't be a burden on society." No congratulations, no pride, just his assessment of my usefulness to the world. My grandmother, however, threw me a celebration dinner at her favorite restaurant. "Education opens doors you didn't even know existed," she told me while presenting a vintage briefcase that had belonged to my great-grandfather. Inside was a handwritten note. "True wealth comes from knowledge and kindness, not from bank accounts. Build something meaningful, my dear Elena." As I grew older, the contrast between these two people became stark. David's visits to grandmother's house increased in frequency, especially as she entered her 70s. He would arrive with expensive gifts and stay for hours discussing family legacy and estate planning. During these conversations, I noticed how his questions always centered around company valuations, property assessments, and inheritance tax strategies. My grandmother and I developed beautiful traditions together. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market, where she knew every vendor by name and taught me to select the freshest ingredients. Evenings were spent in her library, reading everything from classic literature to business journals. A sharp mind is your greatest asset, she would say. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. When I graduated summa cum laude, my grandmother sat in the front row beaming with pride, while my father sent a text message claiming a client emergency prevented his attendance. That evening, grandmother presented me with her mother's emerald necklace. Strong women have worn this for 4 generations, she said. You are the strongest of us all. During my mid-20s, I worked for a marketing firm while slowly earning my MBA part-time. My grandmother's health began to decline as she approached 80. Doctors diagnosed her with severe osteoporosis that made running the company increasingly difficult. Without hesitation, I resigned from my job and moved back home to care for her and learn the family business. Suddenly, David became a fixture in our lives. His once monthly visits became weekly events. He would arrive with wine and flowers, spending hours with grandmother discussing company operations, market conditions, and succession planning. To an outside observer, it might have looked like a devoted son finally connecting with his aging mother. But I noticed how every conversation eventually led to discussions about the company's worth, potential buyers, and estate planning strategies. My grandmother noticed too. One evening after David left, she took my hand. Actions reveal character more than words ever could, she said quietly. Watch what people do when they think no one is looking. I wanted to believe my father was finally developing genuine concern for his mother, but his pattern of behavior suggested otherwise. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning in September. The doctor's words felt like physical blows. 6 months, perhaps 8 if we're optimistic. We sat in the sterile oncology office as Dr. Patterson explained that the cancer in grandmother's liver was aggressive and had spread beyond surgical options. My grandmother listened with the same composure she brought to board meetings. Then, we'll make these months count, she said simply. I immediately arranged for extended leave from my MBA program and moved permanently into my childhood bedroom. My marketing consulting clients were understanding when I explained I needed to scale back to care for my grandmother. The financial adjustment was significant, but nothing mattered more than being present for the woman who had raised me. Caring for grandmother required round-the-clock attention. I learned to manage her medications, coordinate with visiting nurses, and recognize the signs of good days versus difficult ones. During her stronger moments, we would sit in the garden while she shared stories about building the company and raising my mother. Your mama had your same determination, she would tell me. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. David's visits intensified during this period. He began arriving with company documents for grandmother to review, despite doctors' orders to minimize stress. Mom needs to stay involved in what she built, he insisted when I objected. I noticed how he would study her medication schedule and ask detailed questions about her prognosis, as if calculating how much time remained. During these final months, grandmother requested frequent private meetings with her attorney, Harrison Mitchell. Sometimes they would speak in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Once I overheard her saying firmly, "He needs to learn this lesson. It's the only way he'll understand what matters." The end came more suddenly than predicted. On a Friday evening in March, grandmother peacefully passed away in her sleep while I held her hand, reading her favorite poetry. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by my quiet tears. I called the hospice nurse first, then David. My father arrived within 30 minutes, fully dressed despite the late hour. After the doctor confirmed the death and left, David immediately began searching through grandmother's desk drawers and file cabinets. "What are you doing?" I asked through my tears. "Looking for the will," he replied without looking up. Mom mentioned keeping copies in her home office. As I sat devastated beside my grandmother's bed, David made calls to company executives and the funeral director, taking charge with an efficiency that felt inappropriate given our loss. There was no space for grief in his actions, only logistics to manage. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever before. The morning of Margaret's funeral arrived gray and cold. Williams Food Corporation closed for the day, and the funeral home overflowed with people whose lives grandmother had touched. Employees she had mentored, community leaders she had supported, and business partners who had become lifelong friends filled every seat. I wore the black dress grandmother had bought me for job interviews years earlier. Elegance speaks quietly, she had said. David arrived with his assistant, a nervous young man frantically taking notes about attendees and their business connections. He positioned himself prominently in the front row, checking his phone periodically as if expecting important calls. The service was beautiful, but surreal. David delivered a polished eulogy focusing on grandmother's business achievements and impressive financial legacy. His speech sounded like a corporate presentation, using phrases like strategic vision and market leadership that felt hollow, in the sacred space. He never mentioned her as a mother or grandmother, never shared personal memories that revealed her character. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium with trembling legs. Looking out at the crowd, I spoke from my heart about the woman who had shaped my life. My grandmother measured success not in dollars, but in lives improved, I said. She taught me that true wealth comes from the love we give and the positive impact we have on others. After the service, I noticed an elderly gentleman I hadn't initially recognized. He approached me with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Harrison. Mitchell, he said, your grandmother's attorney. She would have loved your eulogy, Elena. He handed me his business card. There will be a reading of the will tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Margaret's home. Please be prompt. David immediately inserted himself into our conversation. I've cleared my entire schedule, he told Harrison. Will the company transfer documents be ready for signature as well? Harrison's expression remained neutral. All relevant materials will be presented tomorrow, Mr. Williams. The reception was held at grandmother's house. I moved through the gathering in a daze, accepting condolences and sharing memories with guests. David, however, huddled in corners with business associates, their conversations seemingly inappropriate for the solemn occasion. I overheard phrases like new leadership opportunities and strategic restructuring that made my stomach turn. By evening, only David and I remained. As I began cleaning up, he made an announcement that stopped me cold. You should start looking for your own apartment, he said casually while reviewing documents at grandmother's desk. What do you mean? After tomorrow's will reading, I'll be moving in here. This house was always meant for the company's CEO. This is my home, I protested. I've lived here since I was 6. As a guest of my mother, David corrected coldly. The property belongs to the estate, which will transfer to me as the heir. You'll need to find your own place. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a simple business transaction rather than uprooting my entire life. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay awake surrounded by memories, trying to process both my grief and the shocking callousness of my father's behavior. By morning, my eyes were swollen from crying, but I forced myself to appear composed for the will reading. At precisely 3 p.m., the designated parties gathered in grandmother's study. David positioned himself behind the antique desk, symbolically claiming territory. Several company executives attended, along with the family accountant and myself. Harrison placed his briefcase on the desk and removed a thick document. I will now read the last will and testament of Margaret Rose Williams, he announced formally. The room fell silent. The initial provisions covered funeral arrangements and bequests to longtime employees. David fidgeted impatiently until Harrison reached the primary inheritance clause. To my son, David Williams, I leave Williams Food Corporation and all associated holdings, valued at approximately $42 million, along with the family residence and its contents. David's transformation was immediate. His impatience vanished, replaced by triumphant satisfaction. He leaned back in the chair, already carrying himself like the multimillionaire he had become. The executives murmured congratulations while shooting concerned glances in my direction. I sat motionless, my hands folded in my lap. While I hadn't expected a large inheritance, being completely omitted felt like final abandonment. Had my grandmother forgotten me after all? Harrison continued reading, detailing charitable donations and business transition procedures. The meeting concluded and people began gathering their belongings. David remained seated, openly smiling now. As the room cleared, I approached Harrison quietly. Is that everything? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Before Harrison could respond, David interjected. You heard it all, Elena. The company and estate come to me. He stood and straightened his tie. I'll give you until Monday to move out. I have interior designers coming to begin renovations. Harrison watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. Mr. Williams, perhaps you'd like to review the complete document more thoroughly, he suggested, offering David the thick folder. I caught the important parts, David replied dismissively. Have your office send me a summary. He turned to me. As for you, your services as caretaker are no longer needed. You were only useful while my mother required assistance. You're worthless to me now. The cruelty of his words stole my breath. Years of seeking this man's approval crashed down as I finally saw him completely unmasked. This was my father's true nature, someone who could discard his only child the moment she stopped serving a purpose. As others left, David remained to make phone calls. I stood in the doorway watching him put his feet on grandmother's antique desk with casual disregard. His voice carried as he spoke to someone. Yes, I got everything. The old woman finally came through. In that moment, something broke inside me forever. The next morning dawned with painful clarity. I had spent the night sorting through 22 years of memories, trying to determine what I could take and what I would have to leave behind. Each item held a story, a connection to the grandmother who had raised me, the antique jewelry box she had given me for my Sweet 16, the collection of first edition books we had read together, the hand-knitted scarves she had made during cold winters. I had just placed the last of these treasures into my second suitcase when I heard unfamiliar voices downstairs. Following the sounds, I discovered 2 uniformed security guards in the foyer speaking with David. Ah, there you are, my father said when he noticed me on the stairs. These gentlemen will be overseeing the property transition. They'll escort you out when you're ready. His tone was businesslike, as if addressing a trespasser rather than his daughter. You hired security to remove me from my home? I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. A standard precaution during ownership transitions, he replied smoothly. Nothing personal, but it was personal. Everything about this situation was deeply, painfully personal. I noticed a locksmith working on the front door. You're changing the locks already? My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain composed. Naturally, the property contains valuable assets. David checked his watch impatiently. How much longer do you need? I have meetings this afternoon. The security guards looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. They were simply doing their job, but the humanity in them recognized the cruelty unfolding before them. I'll need help with these, I said, gesturing to my suitcases. One of the guards immediately moved to assist, relief evident in his expression at having a concrete task. As we descended the stairs, memories flooded through me with each step. This banister I had slid down as a child, despite Margaret's gentle reprimands. The wall where pencil marks tracked my growth through the years. The reading nook in the corner where my grandmother and I had spent countless hours sharing books and ideas. David stood by the door, keys in hand, clearly eager to take full possession of his prize. As the guard loaded my suitcases into my modest Honda, I took one last look around the entrance hall. The crystal chandelier caught the morning light, scattering rainbows across the hardwood floors. How many times had my grandmother pointed out those rainbow patterns to delight me as a child? Is that everything? David asked, his impatience barely concealed. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. Good. The company lawyers will contact you if there are any remaining formalities. He extended his hand mechanically, as if concluding a business meeting. I stared at the offered hand but didn't take it. Some pretenses were too hollow to maintain. Without a word, I walked past him and out the door of the only real home I had ever known. The security guard who had carried my bags gave me a sympathetic nod. I'm sorry, miss, he said quietly out of David's earshot. The drive to the Hampton Inn was a blur of tears and disbelief. I had chosen the modestly priced hotel because it offered weekly rates, and I needed time to figure out my next steps. My savings wouldn't last long, especially with my reduced income during the months I had cared for Margaret. The hotel room was clean but impersonal. Its beige walls and generic artwork, a stark contrast to the character-filled home I had just left. I placed my grandmother's favorite throw pillow on the bed, a small attempt to make the space feel less foreign. Then I sat by the window and finally allowed myself to fully break down. Grief came in waves, not just for Margaret now, but for the father I had never truly had, and the security I had lost in one cruel stroke. The sky darkened outside as I sat, motionless, memories playing like a film reel behind my eyes. By the time I roused myself to unpack the essentials, it was past midnight. Sleep refused to come. I tossed in the unfamiliar bed, my mind racing with questions and fears. What would I do now? Where would I live long term? How could my own father be so callous? Had my grandmother really left me nothing? Not even a message of goodbye? Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent light and the distant sounds of housekeeping carts in the hallway. I forced myself to shower and change, going through the motions of normalcy while feeling anything but normal inside. My phone showed several missed calls from friends who had attended the funeral, but I couldn't bear to explain my situation. Yet, instead, I called Sarah, my closest friend since college, who lived in a nearby town. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Just until I figure things out." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "What happened?" "I'll explain when I see you," I promised, knowing the full story would require face-to-face conversation. After arranging to move to Sarah's spare room that evening, I began researching apartment rentals in the area. The prices shocked me, far higher than I had anticipated. My marketing business had suffered during the months of caregiving, and rebuilding my client base would take time. The future stretched before me, uncertain and intimidating. My phone rang just after noon, displaying an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but some instinct prompted me to answer. "Elena Williams?" a formal voice inquired. "Yes, this is she." "This is Patricia from Harrison Mitchell Law Office. Mr. Mitchell would like to meet with you this afternoon if you're available." My heart skipped. Did he say what about? Only that it concerns your grandmother's estate and is of urgent importance. We arranged a 4:00 appointment. I spent the intervening hours speculating about the purpose of the meeting. Perhaps there was a small bequest after all, something Harrison hadn't mentioned during the formal reading. Or maybe there were personal items Margaret had specifically designated for me. The law office was located in a historic building downtown. Its interior was a study in old-world elegance. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and leather-bound law. Books filled built-in shelves. I gave my name to the receptionist and was immediately shown to Harrison's private office. The elderly attorney rose to greet me, his expression warmer than the professional demeanor he had maintained during the will reading. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Elena," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I expect you've had a difficult 48 hours. The simple acknowledgement of my pain broke something loose inside me. To my embarrassment, tears welled in my eyes. "Yes," I managed. "David had security escort me out this morning." Harrison's eyebrows shot up. "Did he indeed? That's very interesting timing." "What do you mean?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Did your father actually read the complete will?" Harrison's question hung in the air between us. I stared at him, confusion momentarily replacing my grief. "The complete will? I was there for the reading. David inherited everything. The company, the house, all $42 million worth of assets." The elderly lawyer leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Yes, the primary provisions were read aloud as is customary. But did David bother to review the complete document afterward? The conditions and clauses? "He told you to send a summary to his office," I recalled. "He said he caught the important parts." A chuckle escaped Harrison's lips. "Ah, there's the David Williams I've known for 25 years. Always." Too impatient for details. He opened a leather portfolio and removed a thick document bound in blue. "Your grandmother anticipated this exact behavior." My heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" "Margaret and I spent considerable time crafting this will, particularly over the last year as her health declined." Harrison put on his reading glasses and flipped to a marked page. "The inheritance does indeed go to David, but with very specific conditions attached." He cleared his throat and began to read. The bequest to my son David Williams is contingent upon his agreement to provide lifetime support for my granddaughter, Elena Isabella Williams, including but not limited to housing at the family residence, a monthly allowance of $8,000 for living expenses, and coverage of all educational and healthcare costs she may incur. My mouth fell open. Harrison continued reading. Should David fail to fulfill these obligations at any time, or should he act in a manner that causes significant distress or hardship to Elena, the entirety of the estate, including Williams Food Corporation and all associated holdings, shall immediately transfer to Elena Isabella Williams. The room seemed to spin around me. But he already violated that condition. He threw me out this morning. Harrison's eyes twinkled. Precisely. And in doing so less than 48 hours after the will reading, he has defaulted on the primary condition of his inheritance. So what does that mean? I asked, barely able to process the implications. It means, my dear, that according to the legally binding terms of your grandmother's will, you are now the sole owner of Williams Food Corporation and all associated assets valued at approximately $42 million. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Harrison removed his glasses. Margaret knew her son better than anyone. She specifically told me, David will show his true colors within a week, probably within a day. She was quite accurate in her prediction. But why not just leave everything to me directly? I wondered aloud. Your grandmother was a wise woman who understood human nature. She wanted to give David one final chance to do the right thing, to be the father he should have been all along. Harrison's expression softened. But she also wanted to protect you, which is why she created this mechanism. Does David know about this yet? Harrison shook his head. No, and his reaction should be quite enlightening. Your father was too eager to count his millions to bother reading the document that granted them to him. A small laugh escaped him. In my 40 years of practicing law, I've rarely seen justice dispense itself so swiftly. The realization of what had happened began to sink in. My grandmother hadn't forgotten or abandoned me. Quite the opposite. She had created an ingenious test that my father had promptly failed. The house I had been evicted from this morning was now legally mine. The company that had always seemed beyond my reach was now my responsibility. I don't know how to run a food corporation, I said, panic edging into my voice. Margaret considered. That as well. Harrison removed another document from his portfolio. This letter explains her wishes for your transition. She suggests retaining the current executive team while you learn the business, with specific recommendations for mentors within the company. She was quite confident in your abilities, Elena. Tears filled my eyes again, but these were different from the ones I had shed in the hotel room. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling seen and valued by the woman who had raised me. There's more, Harrison continued. Margaret left video messages for both you and David. She asked that they be viewed together, with me present. I propose we schedule that meeting for tomorrow morning. Does it have to be together? I asked, dreading another confrontation with my father. Your grandmother was quite specific about that requirement. I believe she wanted David to witness your reaction and vice versa. Harrison checked his calendar. Shall we say 10 a.m. tomorrow in the conference room here? I nodded, still overwhelmed by this reversal of fortune. In the meantime, Harrison said, handing me a business card, this is the contact information for the estate security company. You may wish to have them meet you at the house later today. To do what? A smile crossed his weathered face. To change the locks back, of course. It's your house now, Elena. As I left the law office, the world looked different somehow. The same streets I had driven in despair that morning now seemed full of possibility. I called Sarah to cancel my stay, explaining briefly that circumstances had changed dramatically. Are you okay? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I think I will be, I replied honestly. For the first time in days, I think I will be. My next call was to the security company. They agreed to meet me at the house at 6 p.m. to change the locks and update the security system. The representative didn't seem surprised by my request, making me wonder if Harrison had already alerted them to the situation. I drove to the estate slowly, rehearsing what I would say if David was still there. Part of me hoped he would be gone, postponing our inevitable confrontation until the official meeting tomorrow. Another part wanted to witness his reaction when he learned how quickly his actions had cost him everything. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed David's black BMW still parked by the front door. My stomach tightened with anxiety, but I forced myself to continue. This was my home now, not his. My grandmother had made that clear in the most definitive way possible. The security team arrived right on schedule, 3 uniformed officers in a company van. I met them at the entrance, explaining that ownership of the property had legally transferred to me and showing them the document Harrison had provided as proof. "We'll need to inform the current occupant of the change in status," the lead officer explained professionally. I nodded. "I understand." David answered the door himself, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock when he saw me standing with the security team. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. The lead officer stepped forward. "Sir, we've been authorized to change the security protocols on this property at the request of the new legal owner, Miss Elena Williams." David's face flushed red. "That's ridiculous. I'm the owner of this property as of yesterday." "I'm afraid there's been a development with the—" "Well, Dad," I said, finding strength in the truth, "you might want to contact Harrison Mitchell for clarification. There was a condition to your inheritance that you violated when you evicted me this morning." "What condition? What are you talking about?" His voice rose sharply. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," I suggested, aware of the security team witnessing this family drama. David stepped back, allowing us to enter. The security team remained professionally distant, focusing on their technical tasks, while David and I moved to the study. "Explain yourself," he demanded once the door closed behind us. "Grandmothers, well, stipulated that you had to provide for me, including letting me live here. By throwing me out, you violated the terms of the inheritance." I kept my voice calm, stating facts rather than accusations. David's face went pale as the implications sank in. "That's impossible. Harrison would have mentioned something that significant during the reading." "It was in the full document, which you didn't bother to read," I replied. "We have a meeting with Harrison tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss everything formally." For a moment, David seemed to deflate before my eyes. Then his expression hardened. "This is some kind of trick. You and that old lawyer cooked this up together." "The will was written and notarized months ago," I said. "Grandmother knew exactly what would happen. She gave you a chance to do the right thing, and you failed within 48 hours. The security team leader knocked politely before entering. "Excuse me, Miss Williams. The exterior locks have been changed. Where would you like the new keys delivered?" David stared at the man, then back at me, the reality of the situation finally penetrating his denial. "This is my house," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not anymore," I said simply. "I'll take the keys now. Thank you." As the security officer handed me the set of keys, I saw something I had never witnessed before. My father looking completely lost. The arrogance that had defined him throughout my life had vanished, replaced by the dawning understanding that he had outsmarted himself. "You can't do this to me," he said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. "I didn't do this," I replied quietly. "You did." The next morning, I arrived at Harrison's office 15 minutes early, my stomach twisted in knots. Despite legally having the upper hand, I still felt intimidated by the prospect of facing my father. "You look just like your mother," Harrison observed as he escorted me to the conference room. "She had the same quiet strength." The comparison bolstered my confidence. I rarely heard anyone speak of my mother, and the connection felt meaningful. In this moment of confrontation, the conference room featured a large oak table with leather chairs and a wall-mounted screen. Harrison had set up a laptop connected to a projector. "Margaret recorded these messages just 2 months ago," he explained. "She was quite specific about the viewing order." At precisely 10 a.m., David strode in, accompanied by a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. "This is Richard Goldman, my attorney," he announced without preamble. Harrison nodded courteously. "Good morning, counselor. I must inform you that this is not a negotiation or legal proceeding, but a family matter as specified in Margaret Williams's will. Your presence is not prohibited, but it won't change the outcome of today's meeting. David took a seat directly across from me, his expression a careful mask. Gone was the shock from yesterday, replaced by calculated composure. Elena, this misunderstanding can be resolved easily, he began. I'm prepared to allow you to stay in the guest house while we sort out a proper arrangement. There is no misunderstanding, Harrison interjected. The terms of the will were quite clear, and David violated them within 1 day of the initial reading. Before we discuss any potential arrangements, Margaret requested that both of you view these messages. Harrison dimmed the lights and started the first video. My grandmother's face appeared on screen, causing my throat to tighten with emotion. She was seated in her study, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same clear-eyed intensity that had characterized her throughout her life. David, Margaret began, addressing her son directly, if you're watching this, then you've done exactly what I predicted. You've shown Elena the door now that you believe you've secured your inheritance. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I've watched you chase wealth your entire life, believing it would bring you the satisfaction that has always eluded you. The company was never enough. The house was never enough. No amount of money filled the emptiness I saw in you. Margaret paused, her expression softening slightly. I gave you one final test, son. One opportunity to demonstrate that family meant more to you than fortune. All you had to do was share your abundance with your daughter, the only child you will ever have. Instead, you showed her the same coldness you've displayed throughout her life. David's attorney scribbled notes furiously, while my father's face grew increasingly flushed. I built Williams Food Corporation from nothing, Margaret continued. My hands bled packaging those first preserves. I worked alongside every employee until my body would no longer allow it. I didn't build this legacy for it to become a monument to greed. The room fell completely silent as Margaret leaned closer to the camera. The company now belongs to Elena, as does the house and all associated assets. This is not a punishment, David. It's the natural consequence of your choices. You've always valued money above relationships. Now you have neither. The video ended, leaving heavy silence in its wake. David stared at the blank screen, his expression unreadable. There's a message for Elena as well, Harrison said quietly, starting the second video. My grandmother appeared again, her expression much warmer this time. My dearest Elena, she began, causing tears to immediately spring to my eyes. If you're watching this, then everything has happened as I anticipated. I'm sorry for the pain David has caused you, but not surprised by it. Margaret smiled gently. You've shown me what true family means through your actions, not just your words. The way you cared for me in my final months was a gift I can never repay, but I can ensure your future is secure. She leaned forward, her eyes seemingly looking directly into mine. Williams Food Corporation is now yours. Don't be intimidated by this responsibility. You have a natural understanding of people that David never possessed. The company needs your heart as much as your head. My grandmother held up a framed photo I recognized, a picture of my mother and me when I was about 7 years old. Isabella would be so proud of the woman you've become. Lead with compassion, Elena, but never confuse it with weakness. You're stronger than you know. As the second video ended, I wiped tears from my cheeks. David sat motionless, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Harrison turned on the lights. There's one final portion to Margaret's message, a letter addressed to both of you. He removed an envelope from his portfolio and broke the seal. Margaret requested this be read aloud in your presence. The letter was brief but powerful. David and Elena. While the legal ownership of the company and assets now belongs solely to Elena, I leave one path for reconciliation. If David demonstrates genuine change and contributes meaningfully to the company over a period of no less than 2 years, Elena may, at her sole discretion, consider sharing a portion of the ownership with him. This decision belongs entirely to Elena and must come from authentic relationship, not obligation or manipulation. Harrison folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That concludes Margaret's final communications. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. David's attorney whispered something to him, but he waved the man silent. For the first time since I could remember, My father looked defeated. "This can't be legal," he finally said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "I assure you, it's entirely legal," Harrison replied. "The conditions were clearly stated in the will. You chose not to read it fully. My office has already filed the necessary paperwork to transfer all assets to Elena, effective as of yesterday afternoon when you violated the terms." David turned to me, his expression morphing from anger to something resembling desperation. "Elena, be reasonable. I'm your father. This company has been in my future for decades. You don't know the first thing about running a food corporation." "I can learn," I replied simply. "Grandmother believed I could." "I made a mistake yesterday," David conceded, his tone shifting to one I had never heard from him before, almost pleading. I was overwhelmed with grief and not thinking clearly. "We can work this out as a family." "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You've never treated me like family. Even when Mom was dying, you were distant. Grandmother raised me while you chased business deals. Yesterday wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was consistent with how you've always treated me." David leaned forward, switching tactics. "I can change. I'll show you. Let me move back into the guest house and we can run the company together, father and daughter, just as it should have been all along." His sudden transformation was so transparent it might have been comical under different circumstances. The man who had coldly told me I was worthless 48 hours earlier was now performing an impression of a caring father. "I don't think that would be appropriate right now," I said carefully. "I need time to understand the business and establish myself as the new owner without confusion about leadership." "You're making a mistake," David warned, a flash of his true nature breaking through the facade. "The board respects me. The clients know me. They won't accept you." Harrison intervened smoothly. "Actually, I spoke with the executive board this morning. They've been informed of the transition and have expressed their full support for Elena." Margaret had discussed this contingency with each of them individually over the past year. This revelation seemed to shake David more than anything else. "She planned this all along." "She hoped it wouldn't be necessary," Harrison corrected. "But yes, she prepared thoroughly for every scenario." David stood abruptly. "This isn't over. I'll contest the will." "You're welcome to try," Harrison replied calmly. "However, I should mention that Margaret included a no-contest clause. Any legal challenge automatically triggers a complete forfeiture of the provision, allowing you to potentially earn back a portion of the company through good faith efforts." My father's attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We should discuss options privately, David." As they prepared to leave, I found my voice again. "Dad," I said, using the term despite how foreign it felt, "Grandmother left you a path back if you want it, not to control everything, but to be part of the legacy she built. That opportunity is real, but only if your change is real too." David paused at the door, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he might respond with something genuine. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and walked out without another word. Harrison waited until the door closed before speaking. "That went about as expected. Your grandmother predicted David would attempt to challenge the will before considering the path of reconciliation." "Will he actually contest it?" I asked. "He may try, but he can't win." Margaret and I created an ironclad document, and David's actions yesterday provided immediate and documented violation of the terms. Harrison gathered his papers. "Now, shall we discuss your transition to company leadership? There's quite a bit to review." As we moved to Harrison's office to begin planning my unexpected future, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for what might have been with my father, gratitude for my grandmother's foresight, and something unexpected, a growing confidence that perhaps I was more prepared for this responsibility than I had initially believed. Margaret had trusted me with her legacy. Now I needed to prove worthy of that trust. The weight of keys feels different when they represent not just a home, but a legacy. As I unlocked the front door of my grandmother's house, now legally mine, the familiar creak of the hinges welcomed me home. The first night alone in the sprawling estate was both comforting and disorienting. I slept in my childhood bedroom rather than claiming the master suite, needing the embrace of familiar surroundings. Morning brought a flood of calls and emails, most expressing congratulations on my new position as CEO of Williams Food Corporation. Some were genuine, from employees who had known me since childhood. Others carried thinly veiled skepticism about my abilities. I saved them all, making mental notes of allies and potential challenges ahead. My first week as company owner was a crash course in food manufacturing management. I spent hours with department heads reviewing active contracts and financial statements. Nights were dedicated to studying industry reports and company history. Margaret had built a solid organization with a strong executive team, making my learning curve less steep than it might have been. David made his first attempt at reconciliation exactly 7 days after our meeting in Harrison's office. He arrived, unannounced at the house, carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing an expression of practiced humility. "I thought we might talk," he said when I answered the door. Father to daughter. I invited him into the living room but didn't open his wine. "What do you want to discuss?" "I've been reflecting on Mother's message," he began, perching uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. "Perhaps I have been too focused on the business aspects of life." "Perhaps," I echoed, waiting for him to continue. "I'd like another chance," David said, leaning forward earnestly. "To be the father I should have been, to mentor you in running the company." His performance was almost convincing. The slight tightness around his eyes was the only tell that his words were tactical rather than heartfelt. "I appreciate the offer," I replied carefully. "But I think we need to establish trust before discussing any business arrangements. Perhaps we could start with regular family dinners, completely separate from company matters." David's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, though my expertise would be valuable during this transition period. The Morrison contract alone requires delicate handling." And there it was, the true purpose of his visit revealed. The Morrison contract was one of the company's largest current projects, worth millions in revenue. "The Morrison situation is being handled," I assured him. "I met with Janet Morrison yesterday. We've restructured the delivery schedule to accommodate their expanded retail locations." David couldn't hide his surprise. "You met with Janet personally? She rarely takes meetings with anyone below executive level." Apparently, she made an exception for Margaret's granddaughter. I didn't mention that the meeting had gone exceptionally well, with Morrison expressing relief at dealing with someone who valued long-term partnerships over immediate profit margins. Our conversation continued in this vein, with David making overtures of family connection that inevitably circled back to business advantages. After an hour, he left with promises to call soon about that family dinner. We both knew he wouldn't. Over the following weeks, David tried different approaches. Sometimes he appeared vulnerable, alluding to health concerns or loneliness. Other times he arrived with business contacts in tow, attempting to leverage their presence into access to company operations. Once he even brought old family photos, a transparent attempt to manipulate my emotions. Each visit followed the same pattern: initial warmth, followed by increasingly obvious attempts to regain control of the company. Each time I maintained boundaries while leaving the door open for genuine relationship, as my grandmother had wished. Meanwhile, I was finding my footing at Williams Food Corporation. My background in marketing proved unexpectedly valuable as we expanded our online presence and modernized our customer communications. The executive team, once wary, began bringing challenges to me directly, finding that my perspective often offered fresh solutions. 3 months after inheriting the company, I made my first major decision: establishing the Margaret Williams Foundation, dedicated to providing culinary arts education for underprivileged youth. The foundation would create pathways into food service careers while honoring my grandmother's belief in opportunity for all. The announcement garnered positive press and industry attention. David appeared at the launch event uninvited, positioning himself near me during photo opportunities as if he had been involved in the planning. I didn't correct reporters who assumed he was supporting the initiative, choosing to focus on the foundation's mission rather than family politics. That evening, as the event wound down, David approached me at the bar. "Clever move with the foundation," he said, signaling for a whiskey. "Good publicity." "It's not about publicity," I corrected. "It's about honoring grandmother's values." David studied me over the rim of his glass. "You really believe that, don't you?" That business can be about more than profit. I do. I met his gaze steadily, and so did grandmother. Something shifted in David's expression, a flicker of recognition that perhaps he had fundamentally misunderstood something important about Margaret's legacy. She left you more than the company, didn't she? David said quietly. She left you her perspective. It was the most genuine thing my father had said since the inheritance transfer. For a moment, I glimpsed the possibility of what our relationship could have been under different circumstances. Yes, I acknowledged, and that's worth more than the $42 million. David nodded slowly, finished his drink in silence, and left, without his usual pitch for involvement in the business. It would be 3 weeks before I heard from him again. During those weeks, I made another significant decision. After much consideration, I established a modest trust fund for David, providing him a comfortable living without control over company assets. Harrison advised against it legally, but supported me personally. Your grandmother would approve of your compassion, the elderly lawyer told me. Just be careful it's not mistaken for weakness. When David learned of the trust, his reaction surprised me. Rather than viewing it as an opening to negotiate for more, he accepted it with quiet dignity. Our next meeting carried a different tone, less calculating and more reflective. Gradually, over the following months, something resembling a genuine relationship began to form between us. It was fragile and often awkward, built on tentative conversations about neutral topics. David spoke about his own childhood for the first time, revealing complexities in his relationship with Margaret that I had never considered. 1 year after inheriting Williams Food Corporation, I invited David to join a newly formed advisory board, along with industry experts and community leaders. The position carried prestige but limited authority, a step toward inclusion without compromising the company's direction. Thank you for this opportunity, he said when I extended the offer. I won't disappoint you. I hope not, I replied honestly. Grandmother wanted you to have a path back. This is part of that path. The healing between us remained incomplete, perhaps always would. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But the journey from that cruel dismissal 48 hours after the funeral to our current cautious collaboration represented growth neither of us had thought possible. As for Williams Food Corporation, the company flourished under my leadership. We maintained the core values Margaret had established while expanding into organic products and sustainable packaging. The Margaret Williams Foundation grew to support dozens of students each year, creating a pipeline of talented, dedicated workers who brought fresh energy to the industry. The most profound change, however, was within me. The girl who had desperately sought her father's approval had become a woman secure in her own judgment. The uncertainty I felt upon inheriting the company had transformed into quiet confidence. I honored my grandmother's legacy not by preserving it unchanged, but by evolving it thoughtfully. 2 years to the day after Margaret's death, I visited her grave alone. The simple headstone bore her name and dates, along with the words she had chosen. True wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned. You were right about so many things, I told her, placing fresh roses beside the stone. About the company, about Dad, about me. The autumn breeze rustled through nearby, trees scattering golden leaves across the cemetery grounds. In that peaceful moment, I felt profound gratitude for my grandmother's final lesson, perhaps her most important one, that true family is defined by love and respect, not merely by blood or legal documents. The inheritance she left me was far more than money or property. It was the understanding that how we treat others reveals our true character. It was the courage to stand firm in my values even when faced with manipulation or rejection. And it was the wisdom to recognize that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it does allow for new beginnings. As I drove back to the house that was now truly my home, I reflected on how quickly life can change. In just 48 hours, I had gone from homeless to the owner of a $42 million company. But the real transformation had taken longer and reached deeper than any legal transfer of assets. I had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters, and that lesson was the greatest inheritance of all. I hope this story resonated with you in some way. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone underestimated you, only to regret it later? Or perhaps you've had a family member who taught you important life lessons through their actions rather than just their words. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it touched your heart. I'm grateful for each of you taking the time to listen to my journey, and I look forward to connecting through your stories as well.